today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the ball. Me out to the buy me some.
On the 30th of April 2018, this is the Monday Morning Quarterback, a program in which every week we look at the events, the Sunday talk shows normally. We won't this morning, but we have other stuff in the pipe here. If there's a big event, we'll look to it, but we'll see. Anyway, nonetheless, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network, we're here, and we, of course, honor our late broadcast partner, Jerry Pippin, every Monday morning when we do this broadcast. Let me just...
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite a moment. Look, I've been to a number of these, and she's not Michelle Wolf's not the first comedian to make some of the forward type of jokes that were made yesterday. But it was awkward. I was at a table at the Washington Post table with Congressman Mark Meadows, big Trump supporter, very very hard conservative, and he and his wife were not really reacting, trying to keep a straight face when these things were happening, and so it was the murmur in the room was. Notable for the reaction even journalists had to some of the things that were being said.
Because of how harsh some of the jokes were?
It was. I think the focus for journalists, including myself, is that this is supposed to be a celebration, certainly of the work that's done, their student scholarships. It's something that we're talking about the First Amendment, and that's what is to be celebrated. Sometimes I think these things can go over and sort of overshadow that.
Susan, you used to head the White House Correspondents Association. When the Trump campaign held this rally, which was kind of counter-programming out in Michigan, the announcement said that the Correspondents' Dinner is for the fake news media to toast themselves. And the president said, why would I want to be stuck in a room with a bunch of fake news liberals who hate me? Did last night buttress that narrative? Did it change it at all?
I think any time you can have a split screen and you have the president attacking the press, and next to it you can have a journalist dinner with a comedian attacking the president in the very critical way the comedian did last night, that is reinforcing a narrative that is not helpful to us. And the White House Correspondents Association does a lot of good work for the journalists who are on the beat every day in terms of access and other issues. But we've had awkward dinners before, no question. But this is a different time. This is a time when this week a poll came out done by Quinnipiac that showed a majority of Republicans say the press is an enemy of the American people, not a defender of democracy. And that is an impression that we need to do everything we can to show that is not true and that is not the case, and that we're motivated not by partisanship but by a search for the truth.
Jonah, you talk broadly about identity politics and populism and nationalism in your book. Where does this piece of it fit in, this narrative about the media?
Yeah, I think, look, I'm not a huge fan of the Correspondents' Dinner. I've been to a bunch of them. I think one of the problems is that it feeds into a narrative, since that's the word of the morning, that is really useful to populists. To say, hey, look, once it started becoming sort of like an East Coast version of the Oscars, with red carpets and who are you wearing and all that kind of stuff, I think the Washington Press Corps kind of lost track of itself. And I'm someone who has dinged President Trump often for his narcissism. The institutional narcissism that was on display last night from the Correspondents' Dinner, I think, was a gift to President Trump. The crudeness towards Sarah Huckabee Sanders was a gift to the White House. It lets them double down on these elites are persecuting us storyline, and I think it was a really bad note for the Washington press corps.
Jamil, some of the pushback from comedians and others has been, well, the president has made personal attacks on people in the past, and there hasn't been the same sort of horror by people in the administration that was expressed last night. Is that a fair defense, or is this sort of bringing everyone down in terms of what the benchmark for behavior should be?
I think you could say it's a little bit of both. I think it is fair to note that the president is vulgar. I mean, is vulgar, has insulted private citizens, has attacked private citizens. The president famously could not bring himself, or infamously could not bring himself, to condemn white supremacist protesters, which I consider to be vulgar. So given that, it's sort of funny to see defenders of the administration say, well, hold on, these jokes are too much, given who they either work for or who they are defending. I do want to make a larger point about sort of the press and its relationship to the American public and sort of the disdain for the press, which is I hope we can avoid some presentism here, that the press's problem of legitimacy with the public goes back decades. This is a long-term problem. It is a function both of mistakes made by the press corps and of an active campaign of delegitimization against the press. And so to think that something like this dinner encapsulates or represents the problem, I don't think it's quite true. I agree with Jonah's criticisms of sort of the spectacle of it all, but this problem of press legitimacy goes back a long time, and I think we should be careful not to think of it solely in terms of events like this.
David, the president's nominee to run the VA, Ronnie Jackson, his personal physician, withdrew this week amid a number of very detailed allegations about his behavior, drunkenness, etc. The president last night at his rally had this to say. I want to play this soundbite about the senator making some of these allegations. The soundbite's not there. Let me read it to you. John Tester of Montana started throwing out things that he's heard. Well, I know things about Tester that I could say too. And if I said them, he would never be elected again.
He's trying to make this an issue, the way that Tester handled this. But I think the bigger issue here goes back again to Dr. Ronnie Jackson. The amount of unsourced allegations that were sort of put out there, I think, was is now being found to not all of these things are being found to have been true about what was said about Ronnie Jackson. We don't know the extent of what was true, what wasn't true. But I think Trump's trying to make this an issue for Tester and make it a partisan issue. Even though I think the bigger question was, how much vetting did the White House do about this candidate? And what were his real credentials on management, beyond sort of even the personal conduct, because this is a doctor who did get high marks from President Obama and his administration, a bipartisan administration, but he doesn't have any management experience. And this is a really troubled agency. And for Trump, it's an important domestic priority. So if he can sort of make this a sort of a gotcha about Democrats sort of trying to undermine him, I think that's what he's going for.
Susan, should we expect the president to be campaigning out in Montana? Does this now change the race?
I'm sure Republicans hope he is, because that's a state that went for him in a big way. But, 6 months from next Tuesday is the midterm election. And I think that there are those in the White House who are concerned that the president is not aware of in what peril he stands if the House is controlled by the Democrats after the November midterms, or even the Senate, how his life is going to change in terms of investigations and subpoenas, much less passage of legislation. And I think there is an effort by those close to the president to give him a wake-up call about campaigning in Montana, about adjusting some of his behavior and some of his rhetoric to help endangered Republican candidates in a lot of races where you might not expect Republicans to be in trouble.
Speaking of some populism here, I want to come to both of you on this, but Jamel, I think it's the first time Kanye West's name has ever been said on Face the Nation, but he and the president had a back and forth this week, the president praising him and saying that Kanye has performed a great service to the black community by praising President Trump, and that prompted an online exchange about whether black people have to be Democrats. This is another artist, Chance the Rapper, out saying this. What do we make of this? And I ask you because the president's talking about it.
I think that the best lens to take to this is to use it as sort of a way to begin to understand political dynamics within the African American community. I think there's this idea that because a large majority or the overwhelming majority of Black Americans vote for Democrats, this reflects sort of broad liberalism within the African American community. But it's more that for Black Americans, and this has been true basically during every single period of American political history where they could participate fully or even partially. Kind of the central judgment Black Americans are making with regards to the party system is which of the two parties is going to hurt us less. And then voting decisions go from there. And so there are a lot of conservative Black Americans, or conservatism, I think it's different than white Americans, but they're still conservative. But they don't vote for Republicans in this moment because they don't feel that the Republican Party is looking out for their best interests. 60 years ago, it was the reverse. So that's, for me, that's my takeaway. A political science lesson, political history lesson about Black political behavior.
Jonah, what do you make of this?
Well, first of all, I resent having to have a strong opinion about Kanye West one way or the other. Similarly with Shania Twain, right? Who said that she would have voted for Trump, but she's Canadian. So, and why are you talking about this in the first place? I think one of the problems that we have in our politics now is that not only is our sort of lifestyles being politicized, our partisan affiliation is being invested with huge meaning, but our politics is being lifestylized. The high walls between sort of what is considered sort of the entertainment world, you know, as I think I've said on here before, Donald Trump kind of broke the blood-brain barrier between politics and entertainment. And it seems that everything is now flooding in. And a lot of us just want sort of safe harbors where not everything has to be about either Donald Trump or politics in general. And it doesn't seem that's the way the culture is going.
Talking about it, though, because Trump talks about it, I just noted quickly that, you know, Trump has 50 million Twitter followers on his personal account. He retweeted the Kanye West signed MAGA cap on that account. The president that same day had said he wanted pictures of Mike Pompeo's visit to North Korea put out in the public. But when those came out, it was the official White House account with only 17 million followers that retweeted that. So, I mean, we can see what's on Trump's mind.
It is. And as I said, first time Kanye West has ever been mentioned on Face the Nation.
You're making history.
Our senior economic advisor to the Trump campaign. Welcome all. Good to see the two of you. We haven't seen you guys in a while. Maureen, I'm going to start with you. Comey and Trump. What do you make? Is this Javert-like? Is this Les Mis-like in your mind?
Well, with Macron this week, we saw Trump's primate male dominance moves, which he also tried on Comey. You asked Comey about why he didn't speak back to Trump. And Comey is a very fascinating figure for Washington because usually you get in trouble from an absence of rectitude, and he's in trouble from too much rectitude. You know, his tortuous explanations, he can't see that what he did was wrong because he's so wrapped up in his image of himself at Ashcroft's bedside and as being the honest man that he can't see that it's about his image. But, you know, the funny thing about Comey is that it's such a great troll because he's becoming rich and selling all these books to Trump haters when they blame him for not making Hillary president. Hillary says he shivved her.
Stephen, what'd you hear?
Look, the last thing he said to you was that, I want to make sure I get this exactly right, that the FBI is committed to values and honor. I think this man has so politicized the FBI and really besmirched the reputation of the FBI with this salacious book that was so personal. I agree that it should have come out after the investigation. And look, I think from people on the right, like me, I don't think he has any credibility anymore. And I agree with you. This is all about selling books. And, you know, he is, you know, I've said this before, but, you know, hell hath no fury like an FBI director scorned. And this is personal. You know, he comes across as just a personal animosity to Trump. And I don't think the book is going to have a lot of lasting influence.
Eddie?
Well, I think you can hold two claims at once. That is to say that he's trying to sell books, and that he is absolutely right about the claim that he doubts the credibility of Trump. That Trump has proven over and over again a propensity to have an uneasy relationship with the truth. He lies.
At a minimum.
I thought it was interesting. He admitted that he went into his first ever meeting with him questioning whether that he was ever going to be truthful.
Right. So
he prejudged.
Right. So no matter what our political leanings are, whether you're a Trump supporter or a Trump critic, I think the facts of the matter are very clear. Trump lies. And Comey's book, whether it's to sell money or whatever, is making very, very clear that the man is...
If you believe them.
I really can't tell anymore, honestly, which camp hates James Comey more. Exactly. Is it the people that worked for Hillary Clinton or people who are now Trump supporters? And, I mean, this book feels like one of the many political biographies that, politicians put out about themselves. This is James Comey selling himself as the embodiment of honor and loyalty and the opposite of everything on both sides of the aisle. And I'm curious, his poll numbers have whipsawed back and forth among Republicans and Democrats. I mean, he was one of the most hated figures by Democrats during the campaign. That's since jumped back around. I'm interested to see if he comes out of this with any.
Well, see, this is exactly my point, though. Even, going back to the email investigation. I mean, his treatment of that, in my opinion, was total. And I say this as a Republican, and it did help Trump win the election. But the way he treated the whole email investigation was political, in my opinion.
Bob Mueller still has some positive views as far as the public is concerned. And I thought this poll here, if I were the president, I'd be concerned here. Views of the Mueller investigation from Fox News here. Will Mueller find President Trump committed crimes or impeachable offenses? A majority, 56%. But what was interesting here is more than 1 in 5 Republican voters now believe. And you could say maybe they're the never Trump Republicans that believe this, Maureen. But that shows you that Mueller has kept his credibility. Comey may be challenged. Mueller still is not.
Well, I think, again, this is one of the most fascinating kind of personality collisions that Washington has ever seen. You've got this former Marine, Boy Scout, completely straight arrow, and then you've got Trump, who is the opposite of that.
I want to get into the investigation a little bit. We know the president got fixated about Michael Cohen, and he wanted to make it clear Michael Cohen's businesses. And then this pops up over the weekend in grocery stores. The front page of the National Enquirer, we know the president has a personal relationship with the owner of the National Enquirer, and there it is, Trump's fixers, secrets and lies. Casey Hunt, this looks like the beginning of the president's attempt to separate from Michael Cohen.
We've been watching this almost play out in public, the president trying to decide if he's going to try and essentially dismantle Michael Cohen or if he's going to try to cozy up to him in the attempt to make sure that he doesn't essentially side with Bob Mueller and give up everything. And it seems as though we are moving in the opposite direction, that the assumption is now that Michael Cohen is likely to flip. He wants to avoid prison, so they have to mount a campaign to undermine his credibility.
Steve Moore, how concerned should Trump supporters be about Michael Cohen?
Look, I thought the raid on Cohen's office was a bridge too far for this investigation.
Do we know that, though? We don't know why they did it. We don't know the evidence
most
yet.
fair-minded people think it was pretty outrageous it was an invasion of civil liberties. But I want to go back to this point you made, which is really, I think, an important one about, how many Republicans believe that Trump is in trouble. I think the reason that this report that came out by the Republicans in Congress about the investigation saying there was no collusion is a really important point here, because it basically is saying this is now a partisan, the only way that they're going to get Trump is what happened after Watergate when Republicans turned on Nixon. That's not happening now. I think it's become it's being portrayed as a partisan witch hunt against Trump, and I actually happen to believe that's true.
Well, the House Republicans made it more partisan, therefore it makes it partisan?
No, it just means
I'm sort of confused by that logic.
Unless Democrats can convince Republicans that there's something here, then I don't think the investigation is going to.
And that's what's interesting about the 1 in 5, right? Even though 1 in 5 may believe that he has committed impeachable offenses, do they care? Right? Do they care if will they hold him accountable for it? I don't think they will.
Well, and I think that's part of why the way this conversation is going is so potentially dangerous, because you say this invasion of Cohen's office was an invasion of his civil liberties. We don't have all the facts to know that. Yeah, we are supposed to be a country that operates under the rule of law, and now nobody believes the same set of facts. The people who are in public office are undermining our institutions that apply the rule of law. Right. Is it possible that Republicans will ever change their minds because they have a completely different set of facts?
The House Republicans put out the House Intelligence Committee report.
Okay, you just heard from NBC, their little round table, number of people there. I had a conservative from the Washington Times there. Had Eddie, whatever his name is, from Princeton, and a number of others. And we had Face the Nation, Susan Page, who writes for USA Today, used to be president of the White House Correspondents. Now, one of the things to be remembered about the White House Correspondents, not so much the comedians that are there. That's just a show that they have, and who knows where that goes. But we've covered the White House Correspondents' dinner around here the last 10 years or more on WBRN Radio on the Boston Red Network. And what we've talked about is the diversity, primarily the number of Latinos, African Americans that are working journalists around the White House. Not very many. And that's the point we want to make, not necessarily what Mr. Wolf, being a comedian there, had to say what DJ Trump was out in Washington and Michigan. There's no doubt. And one thing to be said here, I was around during Watergate, and a lot of people within the country, conservatives, did not believe the charges against Tricky Dick. Now, at that time, we did have moderate Republicans, and some conservative Republicans also felt that Tricky Dick had crossed the line, Tricky Dick Nixon, and it was time for Tricky to go. But the right within the Republican Party, which was not as large as it is today, they brought in, quote-unquote, a so-called moderate out of Grand Rapids, Michigan, Gerald Ford. Now, Ford in later days tended to be more moderate. He was known as the conservative reactionary within the Congress. But you had moderate Republicans, Eisenhower-type Republicans at that time. And Ford was one of the people that wrote against the impeachment of William Jefferson and Clinton, a little bit of history there. And he also ran against Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan in the primary. And of course, he was defeated, Gerald Ford, by Jimmy Carter of Georgia. But to be remembered here that it cuts both ways. Now that you have Lupin Press, fake news, we've not seen that in the U.S. They saw it in Nazi Germany, where you just decide to disparage, delegitimize the quote-unquote press. Now you're talking basically today. Edwin R. Murrow, remember, he had the fight with Gunner Joe McCarthy. You couldn't do that today because at that time you had CBS there, national reach with radio and TV. But today you have all these other upstart networks like Fox, and then you have all of the various sites, the Alex Jones people that come to you via YouTube or whatever. They have their own stations, and they can get the information out there. There are more so-called outlets out there, but the Correspondents' Dinner, you have the monopoly capitalist press there, which is smaller every day in comparison to what it used to be. It used to be if the New York Times or even the Cleveland Plain Dealer wrote something, those of us around the nation would read it. We could go to the library and find the Plain Dealer, or the Times was circulated all over the place. Same thing for the Wall Street Journal. Out there, you could get the Wall Street Journal. They had national editions. Now they have some regional editions, and I believe so does the Times. But the situation was much different during Watergate, primarily from the networks. Of course, you had the Washington Post, a newspaper, but you had CBS News and Walter Cronkite bringing it to you nightly, blow by blow. And the hearings were also one of few things that were broadcast gavel to gavel on the three networks, so they would rotate. Now we don't need to do that because shortly after Watergate, C-SPAN came into being, I believe, in the late 70s. So the whole landscape started to change. C-SPAN used to be the only place we could get the national coverage, of course, of Congress, but of other events. And now they are being superseded. We don't get as many. That's put together by the cable organization, association. I can recall back when on cable we had, first was CNN. We didn't really have, when cable first started, we didn't have commercials. That came later. And of course, we definitely didn't have reality TV. So all of those things have played into this prison, a four-cornered thing that you look at it, and you can see what you wish to see, sort of like a pyramid. So this is what the big argument is. Well, where's James Comey? Well, James Comey goes back to old school of Reinhardt, Neuber, and the old school of theology. So basically he's proselytizing there, talking about morality. That plays to the older crowd. Now, as far as him politicizing the FBI any more than it's been politicized, that is just phooey. An old a term there that you hear in the Nero Wolfe novels, Rick Stout. But nonetheless, this whole ring around the roses. So what we are actually doing now is quarterbacking the talk shows. But if you look at the panels, about all the panels could say was, yeah, James Comey is out there, DJ Trump is out there. Comey made enemies first of the Democrats. Now he's made enemies of the Republicans, and I'm assuming that will push him to the middle ground. Well, there's no doubt about that. Being a Boy Scout personality type, being a religious, there is still some currency out there for those types of individuals, not as much as before. But we've seen the movement at the White House. Jackson, otherwise known as Candyman Jackson, is back at the White House, but he's no longer the president's personal position. Someone else took over. He's too hot, in other words. He's been thrown under the bus. And Michael Cohen is going on the same bus. Now, the problem with Cohen is, DJ Trump talked about it, he had numerous businesses. I first assumed he was basically a lawyer that attended to lawyering type of situations. But no, he was in the taxi cab business and various other multi-million-dollar businesses that he was in. And evidently they were investigating some of those businesses. So what that has to do with Trump, if he's thrown on the bus, very little, but he does know a lot also about Trump's businesses. Not talking about the presidential campaign, but other businesses Trump and his cronies are involved in, and his extended family, in-laws, etc. So this will go in that direction. Now, as far as the Republican report produced by Nunez and company saying there was no collusion between he and the Russian Federation, very difficult to say because you have two tracks here. You have the election campaign, the Trump election campaign, and you also have the Trump business enterprise. And various people there, we know that certain oligarchs in the Russian Federation were involved in some of his business dealings. Now, where that goes, we don't know. See, with Tricky Dicky, basically, with Tricky obstruction of justice related to the break-in at the psychologist's office of Daniel Ellsberg, and their activities and the cover-up of it. But here we have much, much more than that. We have another nation involved in the election, supposedly. Now, understanding the U.S. is involved in Russian elections. They tried to, very publicly, funded groups to defeat V.I. Putin. So again, it's tit for tat there. But when you go to Cambridge Analytica, you talk about not only scraping Facebook data, we'll call it big data, but also active in the British elections with Brexit there. So this contagion is there, and they were in France and various other places. So it becomes the international problem. It gets very, very complicated. And when someone is yelling Lupenpresse, it's very difficult for the average person out there, and even people that are not the average person. I was talking to a fellow the other day that happened to be a geophysicist, very, very intelligent man, but hadn't had a time to keep up with all the nuances of, quote-unquote, this affair, because it comes out in 15, 20-second sound bites. And again, many people don't have time to read the Post, the Times, etc., to get the full information, because you'll spend an hour or more a day reading these newspapers. So in the pace of the society, that plays into it more than anything else. And if you have the CNN, it's just as bad as Fox, blurring out little headlines here. They flip to the correspondent's dinner, which I always see as a boring event, didn't watch it, but nonetheless, and to DJ Trump. But what that does is it hops up ratings at the same time, quote unquote, sells newspapers. So there is a reason to keep it going. Let me move on here past the talk shows. Editorial here in the Washington Post won't spend a lot of time with the Trump administration traumatizing children in the name of scaring immigrants away. Well, that's an old trick right there. That comes from General Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff. He thought of the idea there. The idea is when you arrest the parents, separate the children, put them in a foster care, whatever, because they can't throw them in detention centers. So that is one of the things. Hundreds of children, including scores of younger than 4, have been taken from their parents in the past few months. So they take the kids away, put them somewhere else, and eventually, I suppose, when they deport the parents, they send the kids on their way too. And this is about the so-called caravan, or groups of people that are at the border trying to get a political asylum. They are from El Salvador, Honduras, etc. The gun violence there, drug cartels, all sort of things, highest homicide rates. They had 2/3 of the 30,000 asylum seekers cross into the country illegally, no doubt about that. They come in, and why is El Salvador a hotbed? Well, there's an economic problem in El Salvador, no doubt about that. Not enough jobs, not enough civil society to take care of it. Because if you have a civil society and you do have an army there, you would be able to fight the drug cartels. There's no call that I've seen where for a force of quote-unquote, you have DEA and various types, paramilitaries that the U.S. sends in to, as in Colombia, with the Colombian military who was supposedly fighting drug dealers. We don't hear of that in El Salvador nor in Honduras. What we do know is that there's quote-unquote law enforcement there is very lax. It's a poor country. So a copper can make more money taking bribes than not. It's a country that has literally fallen apart. And that is the problem. And that it can be solved with cooperation there. And the so-called refugees, asylum seekers, have come through Mexico. They have been vetted by the Mexican authorities. That's something that's not in this article. And to finish this up, the U.S. has legitimate interest in deterring illegal border crossings, no doubt about it. But the biggest problem that the U.S. has is people that come, for instance, on tourist visas and overstay their visas, period. They had some situations there with groups of people coming just on tourist visas and crossing into Canada has created a problem for the Canadians. But the idea of asylum seekers, it used to be much more easier to get asylum, but now it is not. And one has to understand that the immigration laws, the history of them, were written for Europeans. They were not written for non-Europeans, and of course that was because of a labor shortage. Now you have various other people coming into the country that are not Europeans, or that you have people coming in, say, from Eastern Europe. There are all kinds of various classifications there. You have some Liberians. You have various others. We're here on special visas for the last 20 years. Special, I say not necessarily visas, but special immigration status. And even some Vietnamese are on some special status. Well, all of that is starting to go away. And it's a political football, because what the Trump administration is saying is we're going to close the borders in the Southwest primarily. But there are a few people coming, particularly from Mexico. These people are coming from other countries that are trying to get into the U.S. Most of them asylum seekers, some for economic reasons if they can get in. And they know that they have to get in as quickly as they can because of the presence there of National Guard types. There's also a wall there. There's all sorts of surveillance that they have to keep people out. Anyway, that's enough on immigration. That has been going on and on and on. There's another Post article here. NRA says guns will be banned during a speech by Pence. Now, this is kind of interesting. They have rare occasion the NRA supports vocal opposition to the prohibition. Now, this he's going to speak. Oh, this is the annual NRA gathering in Dallas, Texas, which includes more than 20 acres of firearm exhibits, expected to draw 80,000 members. But the NRA said the Secret Service will coordinate security for the speech and will not allow weapons in the arena while he is present. The Secret Service has always basically done that. I know when President Obama was in certain areas, the Secret Service banned firearms around their security perimeter, and they were able to deal with including events in open carry states as Texas. Individuals determined to carry firearms will not be allowed past a predetermined outlet perimeter checkpoint unless they possess tickets to the event. Attendees were simply restricted from carrying weapons during President Trump's speech in Atlanta last year. And that is a reason out decision there, no doubt about it. We don't need to worry about that. Let me go to a Pew study here where we have a little bit of time. It's been sitting around and we want to dispose of it. This is on the 17th of April, the future of well-being in a tech-saturated world. A plurality of experts say digital life will continue to expand people's boundaries and opportunities in the coming decade, 10 years, that the world to come will produce more help than harm in people's lives. Still, nearly a third think that digital life will be mostly harmful to people's health, mental fitness, and so-called happiness. Very interesting situation there. The Pew Center asks Americans, internet users, for their bottom line judgment there. Vast majority say it's a good thing. Yet over the past 18 months, a number of concerns about personal and societal impact of technology has grown. And it's let's see. And it's so sent out last week in the congressional grilling of Facebook CEO Zuckerberg. Heavy toll of weight on technology, emergence of digital lash driven by people's disillusion with the online environment, worries about digital dysphoria. There's also been a commentary and research about the effects of digital technology uses can have on the well-being of people. The era of information overload, etc. In light of these, the Pew Center and Edlon University Imaging The Senate queried technology experts here. Some 1,150 experts responded in non-scientific canvassing. 47% of these respondents predicted that individual well-being was more helpful than harmed, whereas 32% said people's well-being would be more harmed than helped. The remaining 21% predicted there will not be much change in people's well-being or where they were. Many of those argued that human well-being will be harmed. Also acknowledge that digital tools will continue to enhance various aspects of life. They also note there is no turning back, no doubt about that. The genie is out of the bottle. Moreover, many of the hopeful respondents also agree that some harm will arise in the future, especially those who are vulnerable. Well, that's already happened there. On the dark web, various people, particularly people that already have psychological disorders, are more vulnerable on this particular situation out there because they can act out their fantasies. 3 types of themes emerge. Those tied to expert views that people will be more helpful than harmed when it comes to well-being. Those tied to the potential harms and those tied to remedies. These experts propose to migrate the foreseeable problems. And the findings do not represent all points of views. And another principal researcher here, Daniel Wachner, he is a founding director of MIT's Internet Policy Research Initiative. Human beings want and need a connection. The Internet is the ultimate connection machine, whether on questions of politics, community affairs, science, education, romance, economic life. The Internet does connect people with meaningful and rewarding information relationships. I have to feel confident that we can continue to gain fulfillment through these connections. From Peter Cranston, a European-based trainer and consultant on digital technology and software applications, there is a top 1% first world response when it comes to bemoaning the impact of hyperconnection on things like social interaction, attention spans, trolling, and fake news, all of which are real, but like complaining about marzipan being too thick on the Christmas cake are problems that come with plenty and surplus. The rest of the world's response, which focuses more on massive benefits to life from access to finance, online shopping, limitless free research opportunities to keeping in touch with loved ones, one in faraway places. Think migrant workers rather than gap year youth. Now, again, this is Micah Altman, a director of critical intelligence of hard science for the program of information science at MIT, says most of the gains in human well-being, economic health, longevity, life satisfaction, and a range of choices over the last century and a half have come from advances in technology that are long-term results of scientific advances. However, these gains have not been distributed equally, even in democracies. Many advances from the field of computer science, information science, statistics, computational social science are beginning to be realized in today's technology. There remains a huge potential for long-term improvements, for since the information is a non-consumative good, it leads itself to broad and potentially more equitable distributions. We talk about this in the theory of knowledge, and that's been around for a very long time. For example, the relatively recent trend towards openness in scientific publications. Scientific data and educational resources are likely to make people around the world better off in the short term by expanding individual access to a broad set of useful information, and in the midterm by decreasing barriers to education, especially higher education. Example, MIT's many courses online. And in the long term by enhancing scientific progress. Well, it does, but also you got to remember that a lot of backward things out there also, like the movement against vaccines. This is from Stephen Downes, a senior researcher at the Office of National Research Council of Canada. The Internet will help rather than harm people's well-being because it breaks down barriers and supports them in their ambitions and objectives. We see a lot of disruption today caused by this feature as individuals and companies act out a number of their less desirable ambitions and objectives. Racism, intolerance, greed, criminality have always lurked beneath the surface, and there's no surprise you see them surface. For a vast majority of human ambitions, objectives are far more noble. I guess James Comey would agree with that. All of these are supported by digital technology. While they may not be visible and disruptive at less desirable objects, they are as real and as far more massive. Continuing towards quality, Paul Jones, professor of information science at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, proposes that future AI, artificial intelligence, will do well to establish enhanced human beings. Writing, humans need tools, humans need and want argumentation. I'm not so sure about that one. And as the saying goes, first we make our tools, then we make our tools form us. Since the first proto-humans, this has been true. The alienation of the industrial age has already given up to the center stage to the twisted social psychology of the service industry. Next, we will our tools create overlords, the more gentle and kind than the textile factories, the sewing rooms, call centers. I believe they will. Concerns over harms. This is from Nicholas Carr, well-known author of numerous books, articles on technology and culture. He calls it the digital deficits. We now have a substantial body of empirical and experimental evidence on the personal effects of the internet, social media, and smartphones. The news is not good. While there are certain people who benefit from connectiveness, those who suffer social and physical isolation in the past. For instance, the evidence comes clear that in general, the kinds of construct and intuitive connectiveness that now characterizes people's lives have harmful cognitive and emotional consequences. Among other things, the research reveals a strong association, like a casual one, between a heavy phone and internet use, the loss of analytical and problem-solving skills, memory formation, contextual thinking, conventional depth and empathy, as well as increased anxiety. There's probably no doubt about that. Let me finish this up because it's a very, very long article. I will go ahead and append this here, and it goes on and on. Anyway, this is a very good article. We'll put it on the marker. Now, let us move on here and do the sports. Nonetheless, the Pacers have taken control over the Cavaliers over the Pacers. The score was 101 Pacers, 105 Cavaliers. Mr. LeBron James dropped 45 to get much needed support as the Cavs hold on for Game 7. So that is history in Game 1 of the second semi-finals in the West. The Jazz 96 and the Rockets 110. The Rockets eliminated, who was it? The Timberwolves. They are long gone. Anyway, let's do, I will do hockey very quickly here. And our beloved Penguins lost 4-1 to the Capitals, and the Predators beat the Jets of Winnipeg and the Predators of Nashville. Game 2, the series is tied at 1-1. The same thing as with the Penguins and Capitals as Game 2. The second round, this is in the National Hockey League, 1-1. On to Major League Baseball, where we are just kind of starting off here. The Tigers were in Camden Yards. Orioles are 5-3 in that contest. The Rays were in Fenway Park. Red Sox 4-3. Good score there. The Reds and Toronto 7-2. The Raiders of Dallas. The Saints were in Cleveland. Oh, God. Anyway, the Mariners were in Cleveland. I don't know why I said the Saints. 10-4. So there's a little humor there. The Rockies and Marlins in Florida. The Rockies were shut out. Rockies had a very, very hot team. Anyway, Marlins 3-0 on that one. And the D-backs and Nationals in Washington. Nationals are 3-1. The Cardinals and Pirates in Pittsburgh. The Pirates shut out the Cardinals. Atlanta and the Phillies in Philadelphia was all Atlanta 10-1. Atlanta had 10 hits, 1 error, and the Phillies 5 hits and 1 error. You don't win games like that. Nonetheless, the Reds were in the Twin Cities. Reds 8-2. Reds had 14 hits, no errors, and the Twins 8 hits and no errors also. The Athletics were in Houston. Astros 8-4. The White Sox were in Kansas City. It was Kansas City 5-4. The line score there. Royals 12 hits, no errors, and White Sox 10 hits and no errors there. The Brewers were in Wrigley Field and were shut out by the Cubs 2-0. Cubs had 5 hits, no errors, and the Brewers 2 hits and no errors. The Brewers had a good team last year. I'm not sure how good they are this year. The Mets were out in San Diego. We didn't get this game, but we've gotten some. The Mets are 14-2 over the Padres. Dodgers and Giants, classic battle there. This time it was up in Northern California. Giants are 4-2. And the Yankees were in Los Angeles, playing the Angels. A 2-1 score there. CC Sabathia was a winner. And Skaggs was a loser, and Mr. Chapman got the save. This will do it for us on the 30th here. We'll have special May Day programming on all of our channels across the Boston Red Network, including Boston Red, a BR on the World. That's our international, where we'll be reporting on May Day activities around the world. It is the International Workers' Holiday. And also working stories. We talk about, in Ohio, Dennis Kucinich. Progressive is running for governor there against the selected candidate by the Democrats, Mr. What was his name? Anyway, he was at the Financial Protection Agency. He had Senator Warren there to speak to him, and she just said, well, he's one of these candidates that is not a plain candidate. He's a geek, a nerd. I'm not sure which one she called him. But the problem is the Democratic Party cannot run these candidates that are Walter Mondale types. Doesn't work in the age of mass media. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you on May Day.